I know that this hour and 15 minutes is not going to be enough to even, touch the tip of the iceberg, but I want to dive into this. And as we do, I'm going to be putting into our chat the bios of our incredible panelists. And I want to start with Dr. Jimmy Noriega, who's an associate professor and chair of the Department of Theater and Dance at the College of Wooster and is the vice president for conference at ASTR. Yay! He's the founder of Teatro Travieso and has directed over 40 productions in English and in Spanish in more than a dozen countries. He's also the co-editor of Theater and Cartographies of Power, Repositioning the Latino Americas, which is available from Southern Illinois Press. And I'll put his little email in case any of you would like to contact him in the chat so that after this conversation. All right. And we have Dr. Khalid Long, and he is an assistant professor of theater and the coordinator of theater studies at Columbia College, Chicago. Dr. Long's teaching and research interests include African American and Black diasporic theater, performance, and literature through the lens of critical race theory, Black feminist, womanist thought, queer studies, and performance studies. Accordingly, his work pays close attention to the intersections of race, class, gender, and sexuality within the marginalized and the oppressed communities. Thank you so much, Dr. Long. And next we have Dr. Dani Snyder-Young, who is a scholar artist whose work focuses on theater and social change, applied theater, and contemporary U.S. activist performance. She is the author of Privileged Spectreship, Theatrical Interventions in White Supremacy, Northeastern Press, and Theater of Good Intentions, Challenges and Hopes for Theater and Social Change. She is the assistant professor of theater at Northwestern University. And last but not least, we have Aviva Neff, who is a PhD candidate in the Ohio State University Department of Theater, studying theater for social change and practice and research. Her dissertation, Blood, Earth, Water, the Tragic Mulata in Literature, History, and Performance, traces the complicated unmaking of mixed Black women from the enslavement to the contemporary era by examining performance modes that complicate our understanding of identity, nationality, and history. Aviva is interested in Afrofuturism, Black spirituality, and community engaged work. She also is on the job market, everyone. That's very important. We gotta hire our PhDs, especially during a pandemic. All right. With that said, I'm gonna place everyone's bios in the chat so that you have them and ways of communicating with people, whether it's social media, whether it's email, especially if you want to continue the conversation with everyone. Again, our session is being recorded, and so I just want to make sure that everyone knows that. I am Daphne Sicre, Dr. Daphne Sicre, and I'm the assistant professor of theater arts at Loyola Marymount University. I engage in anti-racist and culturally competent theater practices, and I facilitate Theater of the Oppressed workshops mixed with hip-hop pedagogy to teach about equity, diversity, and inclusion in theater. And when I'm not writing or teaching or conducting workshops, I am directing. And well, this not a workshop, it's a talk, and I am going to be the facilitator of this talk. So thank you again for joining us in this conversation about season selection with an anti-racist approach. And let's just start. We're gonna dive in, and we're gonna just, I'm gonna ask my panelists, whoever wants to share, whoever wants to start the comment, it's a conversation. So there's no need to, just feel free to jump into the conversation so that we can have it. So we're gonna start with, how do you create a season that focuses on reduction, prevention, and repair when past seasons have been so harmful to BIPOC students? How do you respond to colleagues and mentors who do not see value in these approaches to anti-racist seasons and practices? So if anyone would like to jump in and try to start the conversation, and I'll ask one more time for anyone who is interested. And I'll put this in the chat. How do you create a season that focuses on reduction, prevention, and repair when past seasons have been so harmful to BIPOC students? And how do you respond to colleagues and mentors who do not see value in these approaches, especially anti-racist seasons and practices? If you are joining us, please feel free to turn off your cameras as we are recording. All right, so who wants to jump into this question? Because I know it's not an easy one.
I'll start then.
Go for it.
It was getting quiet. So I've actually been speaking about this with my students for several years, right? How is the season selected? What do we do to ensure that there's representation on the stage? And how do we reach across the university to use our space, not just as artistic practice and training ground for the theater arts, but also as a communication and a social tool to enlighten the campus and to be able to bring into dialogue those types of conversations that are very necessary for us. I have found often that a lot of professors don't go straight to the source, which are our students. If you start a conversation with them, if you ask the students, what types of stories are you wanting to be told? What types of stories are you interested in telling? In what ways can we use our season or the show that I'm directing, for example, to open up dialogue about an important issue? What might you want it to be? What would your wish lists include? And right, this is obviously a difficult thing for all of us here, because we can't give everything that we want all the time, right? There's resources, there's the number of students, there's so many issues that we have to confront and face as we're planning out a season. But if you even start with the conversation, I think that at that point, you're already inviting in a response. You're already reducing the harm. You're already creating an inclusive space. And that's a good way, in my opinion, to even just begin and to start. I was also really just trying to think of a way of how I, as a director, approach the shows that I select when I'm here on campus. And I was thinking, and I came up with this statement where it's going to seem large, but I think it's really important for those of us who are chiming in, who maybe are not from BIPOC communities, or who have departments that are mostly non-BIPOC communities. By virtue of who I am and where I am at, rural Ohio, I see my selection of each play that I direct as a political act. I am selecting playwrights of color, or I am working with students of color, or I'm working on themes that directly reflect BIPOC students, BIPOC experiences. And that in itself is a political act. It's not impossible to open up our stages to new voices and new perspectives, but we need to be inviting in. So that's point one. Two, how are you creating political dialogue in your selection of the season or in the play that you create? And last, but definitely not least, in what ways are you holding yourself accountable? This is such a simple step that I have found that a lot of institutions have used very strategically, which is, we can't find the right play. Well, then commission someone to write a play for you. It's very easy. There are people out there who will write these plays for us, who will write plays for your universities, for your institutions, specifically for your students. So if you can't find it, commission it. And that's what I'll start with.
Dominique Morisseau was commissioned to write a play at Penn State, and she wrote Blood at the Root, you know, which is, and so here's a story which is all about political activism and Black voices and what happened to the Gen of Six. And she looked at her cast of students and she was like, how do I tell the story with these students and commission this incredible play? And so you're absolutely right. It's completely possible, and it's happening, and people are doing it. What else? Other thoughts about this?
If I can share an example, because I think we all know what it looks like when it goes wrong, right? Especially nowadays. If I can share an example of something that my department did that I felt was very right a few years ago. My department held at the Ohio State University, we held a very structured town hall meeting regarding season selection, where after accepting recommendations for plays, facilitated by a season selection committee that was comprised of faculty, staff, graduate, and undergraduate students, the committee held about an 1.5 to 2 hour long session that was open invite, where people were allowed to speak about their questions regarding the show's content, to talk about things that they felt they wanted to see the season reflect. And I felt that was what came from that, what grew out of that, was one of the more productive and I think successful seasons that featured not just diversity in the playwrights, but diversity of experience within the content of the show, which I think is a very important thing that we need to turn more consciously towards. It needs to go beyond representation. We need to think about what kind of stories we are currently representing on our stages.
So in addition to all of that, we need to think about our audiences, and that we need to prepare our audiences to meet these plays. And so to Jimmy's point, in a predominantly white institution, in a place in which white audience members are coming to see the stories of people of color, they don't always respond in the ways that we would like. And they need some help meeting that work. And so we're beautifully positioned as educational institutions to help engage in those conversations and help prepare audiences to meet the work and help create constructive spaces and affinity spaces to process that work. And so we can think not about the season, the productions on our stages, not in isolation from our curricular practices, our dramaturgical practices, that wider ensemble of meaning-making tools that we have at our disposal as a university.
Absolutely.
I would sort of just echo everything that has been said up here, and I wanted to hit on something that Jimmy said, which is, you know, sort of being, I guess, taking a political stance, right? When thinking about season selection and when developing a season. I have several notes here, but some of those things have already been sort of, I don't want to just repeat what's been said here, but I definitely want to, and I also want to sort of piggyback on what Aviva and Dani just spoke about, which is sort of the dramaturgical methods and implementations, right? I'm a dramaturg, right? And I specialize in audience engagement. So I'm always thinking about the audience. But as we're thinking about academic institutions, and particularly theater departments, for me, the students are the first, you know, set of audience members that we're going to engage, right? And I think, and particularly where we are now with regards to the pandemic and COVID-19, I think also we need to begin to rethink, you know, what our purpose of the seasons, right? Which is a dramaturgical question, right? Secondly, we have to really think about the ways in which we are producing these performances or these plays, right? And by that, I mean the process over product. I've always been a process over product person, hence the reason I went to school and studied theater, right? I was intrigued by the discussions to come out of, you know, by studying these plays and the goal of producing these plays, right? But I mean, for instance, you know, we have to really, I think, I'm looking at my notes here. And for me, and this goes back to Jimmy's point, I'm interested in seasons that, when we think, particularly around your question, Daphne, about, seasons that aim not to be harmful, but to be, you know, productive, right? What does it look like to produce a season where we select plays, old and new, and perhaps commission some new works that offer strategies, or at the very least illustrate possibilities for a socially just and equitable world, right? So I think about playwrights who have done this already. I think about Alice Childress, who in her play, Wine in the Wilderness, which I just taught, or Trouble in Mind, she's addressing the very questions that we're still asking today, and she's using theater to do so. And so when we think about dramaturgical methods, particularly around audience engagement, how can Alice Childress help us, or how do we use her plays to open up for discussion with our students, with our audience members, right? And back to the point about, you know, the ways in which we're producing these plays, right? Is it really about the final product, or is it the process that we're interested in? And so with that being said, what would it look like to produce a season where it's workshops and critical discussions and audience engagement rather than, you know, final product? What would it look like if week 3, we spend the entire week talking with and engaging with the designers about their process, and in particular, you know, the ways in which they develop cultural competency as designers, right? As opposed to just simply meeting with them 2 to 3 times, months ahead, and then the final product is them designing, and we see the lights, and we see the costumes, we see the set, and the other designers and artistic, personnel, you know, and those are just some of the things I'm thinking about, right? Finally, you know, I think that all of us, a lot of the things that we're saying now, and this is me sort of being a bit critical. I'm going to get really kind of critical and sort of critique even my own school and other schools around the country. You know, this conversation is I am fatigued a little bit with the conversation, right? And not necessarily one we're having, but at large, right? Because these are not new discussions and these are not new questions. And so for me, I'm really at a place where the possibilities are there. I used to use the word possibilities. What are the possibilities? The possibilities. I think now my question to everyone, is particularly within academic institutions, is what is the desirability to move forward with this work? We know what to do. How then do you implement it? And how do you do it with a sense of urgency? Yeah.
Thank you. And that is exactly what an anti-racist approach is about. And one of the things that I often, I do workshops that engage in anti-racist pedagogy. One of the things I tell people and participants in my workshops is there is a hierarchy in a system that has already been built that is racist. It just is. And we are designing our seasons to sort of fit this hierarchical system that already works. And the only way to dismantle it is by changing the way that we produce our own seasons. So if we want to change the industry, we have to change it because our students are the next theater makers. So, you know, instead of going and having this like process, Broadway, you know, film, all of a sudden, if we teach differently, if we present seasons differently, we are changing this sort of like trickle up, trickle down effect, then we can help change the industry, which is already racist, period. My follow-up question was like, how do we respond to colleagues and mentors who don't see value in these conversations and into creating, one of the things I have often heard in multiple institutions has been, or, oh, we don't have the students, it's one, or like, oh, but blah, 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 blah. Or sometimes they forget that an anti-racist approach is intersectional, and then they'll want to just talk about the one aspect of diversity, not how it intersects with everything. And so how do we talk to our colleagues? How do we talk to our mentors who have been brought up again in this system, which is racist and hierarchical and capitalistic, and that's all they know? So how do we change it? How do we have conversations with them?
So my department at Northeastern University had a leadership shift. About a year and a half ago, we had a whole bunch of people leave, and Antonio Ocampo Guzman took over as interim chair, and now he's the permanent chair. And Antonio started us on an equity, diversity, and inclusion initiative that was department-wide. And so the first thing he did when he stepped into the chair's seat was to start these conversations with the faculty. So in advance of planning an anti-racist season, because he had the season that he had inherited, he started working with us to work on ourselves. And that meant tapping into all of the university resources that already existed to facilitate conversations around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and to expand that. So we did, you know, department-wide town halls, so it was with the full department, including the students, and listening spaces to open up those conversations and to help bring the faculty to a consensus around our values and the ways, and then the question becomes, how do we enact our values? Because we have a shared understanding of what those values are. It can't happen in a vacuum, and it can't happen with me talking at you. It has to happen together in a collaborative way.
Yes. My faculty is engaging in that right now as well. We're engaging in these deep talks. Before we realized we had to backtrack. We were trying to create an ethos, an anti-racist ethos, and we're like, no, we need to backtrack and really have these conversations.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, part of that is one of the challenges that I think we need to accept, that not everybody is going to come on board with this approach, that someone's going to use an excuse about artistry, about training, about the importance of history and why we always need to do a Shakespeare, or why we always have to go back to the classics, right? These are embedded within our departments. And the issue is, we can no longer operate with that same mentality if we want to truly respond to what our students are coming into our spaces wanting to know, but more importantly, needing to know once they exit. So one of the mantras that I've just been using as I talk to colleagues and as I talk to friends about this is, time's up. What do you tell to those people who are resisting you? Time's up. You either get on board, or we're going to continue to have the same issues, but I'm not going to be a part of this continuing repetition of problematic staging, of problematic seasons. We've done a better job, I think, at trying to diversify and open up an inclusive approach to our teaching and our syllabi and in our classrooms and the types of plays that we teach. Yes, but what are you signaling to your students if the season does not include last names of playwrights by color, if it does not include women, if it does not include a diverse array of what you're trying to replicate in the classroom. It shows your students, I'm incapable of doing at our own level here the things that we're trying to teach you when you move out into the professional world, or even when you just move out into any avenue of what you're trying to understand. And I think part of the problems and why it comes across as a bit aggressive from my perspective is we've had that aggression against us for a long time.
Yes.
It's time to push back, and to push back hard, because time is up. And we need to make the progress. And you'll hear in those conversations, right, colleagues or mentors who resist, who push back. I just want to signal to everyone out there, as much as there are those people who are going to say no, there are allies. And sometimes your allies exist outside of your department. Sometimes you partner up with other departments who are interested in the type of work that you're doing, the type of research, and who are very, very enthusiastic about seeing what the stage can become for their own students as well. So it's sometimes an issue of, okay, you're not willing to jump on board, we'll leave you because we have some progress to make here.
Yes.
And I think that that's a perfectly fine response.
And the partnerships that are available at our institutions, like Dani said, and you're mentioning, there's tons. There are tons. Like, partner with the Black Student Union, partner with, you know, the Latinx, partner, like there's so many partnerships and that you can just bring in and be doing the work. And you're absolutely right. Like if you're finding that confrontation in your own season, in your own department, you know, the university's still there. I mean, the library loves doing things, and, you know, they love research. So what a great way of creating something.
I mean, well, Jimmy sort of, you know, summed up my comments, and that is simply get on board or go. That's where I'm at, you know, and I would also add to that then, you know, we have to sort of charge our leaders, our artistic directors, our chairs, our deans. We have to charge those who are in power to sort of, you know, challenge, change, or shift and sort of remove, and at the very least, remove the power from those who are not willing to do the work so that we can implement an equitable department. Yeah, I mean, you know, there are folks with power, and they have to utilize that power for better.
Aviva, as a graduate student and having gone through the process, like what, you know, how does this look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, speaking as someone who doesn't feel like they have a lot of power, both in my department and at the university at large, because I'm at OSU, y'all. That's a big university, right? Which is great because, as everyone on this panel has said, there are so many resources to commune with and to collaborate with. I will say I have really struck gold with my mentors. What's up, Jimmy? My undergraduate mentor right there next to me on this call. I've been really fortunate that I have had just solid mentorship from my time at the College of Wooster up through now as a PhD student. But what has emerged, what has like fed me, sustained me over these past few years in graduate school has really been other BIPOC grad students across departments. And I am consistently amazed at, you know, just the really radical solidarity I have experienced from other grads. I will say, if I can give, I don't know, a grad student advice to faculty, which take it or leave it, I think it's really important to model the sort of behavior that the other panelists have said. I mean, BIPOC people do it all the time, right? We're used to getting those reputations of being troublemakers in our departments. And I think, you know, white faculty, it really is time for you to step up and stand up for your BIPOC students, stand your ground, model this sort of, you know, very conscious conversations about these topics, create opportunities for your BIPOC students, graduate students, and colleagues to be heard and listened to. But the time to support this is now, because otherwise, you're the dinosaur and we are the comet, you know?
And it's true, the amount of students across the country that are writing letters and documents and manifestos, and if the department's not supporting them, they're holding their own town halls. I mean, the numbers keep growing and growing and growing. So this is not an isolated event in one university. And if it hasn't happened at your university, don't think it's not about to happen. Don't think that these students are not showing up. Don't think that they're not planning it. So it, to really start having these conversations and making this happen. So with that, like my next question talks about, in predominantly more like at a predominantly white institution, and it could apply to an institution that might not be predominantly white, but its faculty might be predominantly white. So you could be an institution that's not, but when your faculty is white, sometimes that could also create a little distancing and difference. So what does it mean to decenter whiteness in season selection? Like, how do you achieve this? What does this look like? And this makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It makes a lot of white people uncomfortable to say that I'm going to decenter whiteness. And you could see someone just be like, and it's really interesting to read their body language. And so how do we do this in a season selection? And more so, how do we do it in a space that is predominantly white or has a faculty that's all white, but maybe the students aren't? And that changes things a little bit. Yeah, go for it.
If I can jump on that one. That was the question that I thought about a lot. I mean, I got up at like 5 this morning to jot down. I couldn't sleep about that one. And I think my response to that would simply be, it means to challenge everything that we know about theater. From the ways in which we've learned or learned theater to how we produce theater, right? It is predicated on white supremacy and systemic racism. And then that includes the other, other forms of bias and the isms, right? And that includes all of the other isms, right? And I think so, first and foremost, we have to challenge everything we know about theater. It also means that we have to put people with radical visions in positions of power. And when I say positions of power, I mean as chairs of departments, as artistic directors, as associate chairs, as coordinators of programs, people who have a vision and are ready to implement those visions. And this means that folks, they're giving a nod to what Aviva just said, right? To our folks, our white folks who have been in positions of power for a very long time. And to some degree, things have not changed under your reign. It is time to step aside, right? And I know that sounds, to give a nod to what Jimmy was saying, a bit assertive or aggressive, but at this point, we are literally looking at a world that is crumbling, right? And we are experiencing deaths, whether that is, a social death or a corporeal death, right? We are experiencing deaths literally. And it is time to do something drastically different, and it needs to happen like now. And so folks with power, you got to get out the way and let the people step in who have the vision and the life experiences as being someone who has often found themselves within a disenfranchised community or a marginalized and oppressed community. You got to let them step in, right? Also, what it means to be prepared and be ready to respond to the backlash that you will receive from predominantly white parents who pay the tuition of their students. And when they say, well, I pay the tuition and my child is not getting the opportunity to perform in a production this semester, and simply say, your child has the opportunity to participate. They will not be centered in the production, but they can learn. This is it's about pedagogy, and this is an academic institution. And not only are we here to give your child or the student, I should say, experience with production, right? Production experience, but we're also here to, challenge them and to also give them an experience so that they are intellectually and culturally galvanized, right? And that's okay. It is okay to say we're doing a season of all women of color playwrights who are centering women. That is okay, right? It is a wonderful thing, actually. And so I'll be quiet on that one, but yeah, just in beginning.
No, do not be quiet on that one. Yes.
If I can add something, we're talking a lot about season selection, but curriculum is also so important in this instance, particularly when, like at my university, part of the ways we get butts in seats is by requiring theater students, even non-majors, to come and see plays as part of that curriculum requirement, right? So it's all symbiotic, I guess is what I'm saying. And I really do think that there needs to be a concerted effort to review what sort of introductory texts we're teaching to non-majors. We all know that we have that class that fills up with non-majors, and you got to teach the greatest hits of theater. And I think it's time to really think critically about what sort of work we are canonizing in 2020. Personally speaking, I teach a class where I don't have a single non-Black playwright, scholar, except for Eleanor Fuchs, because you got to have that Visit to a Small Planet. But other than her, I don't have a single non-Black writer, author, playwright on my entire syllabus. And it's good for my students. You know, that's really how you decenter whiteness in your curriculum. Add more people of color, thinkers of color onto your syllabi, and spend some time learning how to teach their stuff. You know, it's not whiteness, so it's not what we're ingrained to think of as, you know, the primary source of theater education. It will take a little bit of work on your behalf, right? If that's not something you're used to doing, but that work is necessary. And I think, you know, it's just reflecting on intro to theater classes that I've taken, intro to acting classes. I think I had one faculty member in my experience, in my entire, you know, school experience, it was Jimmy, spoiler alert, who really made a dedicated effort to make sure that we were reading Latinx playwrights, right? Black playwrights. Otherwise, it's just all Chekhov all the time. And that's a very narrow view of a rich and exciting field. So I think excite our students by giving them something different and showing what the new normal can be.
I always tell people they need to read plays. They need to read plays, and they need to go see plays, like, and not what you're used to and what you feel comfortable with. Like, you've got to see and read plays if you're going to be teaching them, if you're going to be suggesting about them, if you're going to be introducing them to your students. You have to read plays. And I mean, it's so easy to read a play. You can read one play a week, and you could really will have read like 50 plays in 1 year. Dani, I think I might have cut you off. I think you were going to say.
Oh, no. Well, so there's a process of asset mapping that can be done at a predominantly white institution. And so what resources are available in the local community? And so, and in this moment of disruption in which there cannot be business as usual, we can't gather to have live co-present performances. So, okay, in that rupture, what resources exist? So at Northeastern, we have a season in which all of this fall, 3 out of our 4 shows are directed by Black women. And by doing some asset mapping, we looked around, and we're in Boston. And so we have a professional community that includes BIPOC artists who we can hire. We looked around, and in the pandemic, professional theaters are withering on the vine. And so we collaborated with Company One, which is a well-established multicultural theater that's been building social justice oriented work embedded in communities and in collaboration with communities for 20 years. And so this fall we did a co-production with them. And so we did a new play by David Valdez called Downtown Crossing that is about the experiences of undocumented immigrants, and it was directed by Summer Williams. And that was a play in which there was only one role for a student, and that was a white man. But there were ample opportunities for assistant directors and assistant dramaturgs and assistant designers and stage managers and props designers, and a whole cohort of students with priority given to students of color were able to get those professional credits and be mentored by those fantastic professional artists. And in order to counterbalance that there weren't roles in that, so we're doing an audio drama that does have roles, that has space available for white students in particular. I mean, 93% of our majors are white women. And for all that it is, like, I want to say, like, all right, they can just sit down. Like, realistically, our budgets are determined by butts and seats in our classes. And so we do have a responsibility to the students who take the classes, who do the work, who want to be with us. And so how do we open up learning experiences for them? And in this case, Pascal Flores, who is a local African-American director, she's devising an audio drama based on Langston Hughes's poem Harlem and Raisin in the Sun for an ensemble that then had room for those white women, centering experiences that they could then learn about. And we developed, I mean, something we're not talking about is developing a pipeline of student directors and student leaders. And so we have a play in our season that's being directed by a Black woman who is a student who'd been mentored through a pipeline. Like, she was slotted to direct this fall from way back. And so that's putting her perspective, right? Centering her perspective. And that thinking about all of these in tandem, how do we collaborate? How do we decouple production from acting, if that's what we need to do? How do we, okay, there aren't opportunities on the main stage. How do we find a workshop production? Where are the creative solutions that we can use to be able to rally our assets?
Dani,
Yeah,
you just made me so happy. I'm so sorry. Dani, you just made me so happy. Pascal was my former high school student. So, you know, talk about, you know, growth and like all these different things and connections and leadership and giving people certain positions and how it all works. Like it all, everything interconnects. So Jimmy, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I want to follow up on what Dani was saying and then pick up on what Aviva said, which is, right, we're focusing on season selection right now, but it's recreating and reimagining the way we run our entire departments. And I'm also thinking just about our audience members right now and the others who are going to watch our video who are going to have a lot of questions like, okay, yeah, it's hard because of where I'm at. And so I just want to give a quick example, right? I'm in Ohio. They call us rural Ohio over here. I think I consider it's different, but it's all right. I've been here, this is my 10th year, so I've directed 9 plays since I've been here. Those 9 plays, 5 of them have been written by BIPOC playwrights and 5 have been written by women. Another one of the plays was written by, it was Larry Kramer's Normal Heart. So, right, even though it was a white man, he was a very radical queer. So I felt that it fit in the agenda of how I view theater and in terms of socially trying to change the consciousness of our students and prepare them for the world they're entering. Nobody would have thought that would have been possible in Ohio. It takes work.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing. Everybody wants to do it, so you also have to be willing to put in the work to do it. And I'll give you one quick example. So I was told my 2nd year here, you need to direct a classic. Okay. Well, I directed Life is a Dream, but it was the adaptation by Nilo Cruz. Simple. Right? You could look at the adaptations that many playwrights of color, many BIPOC playwrights are working on. So they're reinterpretations of the classic. They're ways of examining the classics, but through the BIPOC experience. And there you are accomplishing 2 goals at once. You're teaching the classics and you're expanding the curriculum, the canon, the theatrical stage. I also want to point out that, you know, we're talking about ways to think of a season. And I think we underestimate the power of guest artists. Sometimes we want to give guest artists the entire responsibility. I don't think that's fair, but guest artists coming into campus are part of your season. It can become integral to diversifying the season in a way that you might not have the resources to do at the time. So definitely invite the people you know. And not all guest artists have to do a finished product. It could be a work in progress. It could be a workshop, something where they speak to your students about. There's nothing more empowering for BIPOC students, and frankly, all students in general, to be able to witness artists working and creating work and discussing what those works are about. Just 2 more things real quickly. When I became chair, implemented 2 new things in my department. One was I created a transnational performance series, and I purposely partnered with people outside of my department. So one was Africana Studies, one was Religious Studies, and as faculty change and move around, you got to find them. Communication Studies one year, right? But our goal was 3 transnational performances that we're presenting on the stage. We worked together, build them as a series, and we asked the students to come start witnessing what it means to diversify the stage, not just with a US context, but in a whole transnational and global context. And that has been very successful. They're in fact some of our most well-attended performances at the College of Wooster, simply because they're already coming from the idea and brainstorming of multiple departments to begin with. And then the last one is, it's simple, and you were all mentioning this, right? Watch plays, watch plays. We bus our students up. I take students at least once a year to Cleveland to watch shows, and they're purposefully selected. One show of the 2 that we watch in that day is by a person of color. The students are exposed to professional theater by BIPOC individuals and know that it's not just something we read about as a secondary text, maybe in a syllabus. It's already implemented. So across the stage and all that you're doing, across the entire curriculum and department, you could put in moments there, create opportunities for students to workshop their shows, create students for moments for students to maybe devise or collectively create a piece. But the most important part about that, when you empower the students to present their work, you can't make them feel like they're secondary. We're not main stage, we're kind of workshopping. No, it's equal value. And you need to make the students respect the work that they're doing so that they are getting the respect from their peers in the process too. Yes, it might not be faculty director. Yes, it might not be with the same resources and money on the main stage, but this is just as valuable and just as important as what we're creating. And when you get that dialogue working within the department, you're going to see your students begin to thrive and grow and then bring you additional ideas. And then the last point, sorry, I keep on making so many. The last point, because you need your students on your side. You cannot do all of this work by yourself. I find so much support from students who come up to me with ideas, for students who say, I hear that you want to do this thing, how can I help you? And it means that I'm no longer carrying it on my own. I find joy. I find fulfillment in being able to have those students assist me in making these opportunities happen, right? Researching plays that they want to see and coming to me with the list. Contacting the theater and seeing if they can arrange for the seats for all of us to sit together in a group, right? You are creating that leadership. You're creating that type of independence and just ability for students to find fulfilling work in what they're doing and not just being participants in the process, but active people who are crafting that for us.
Yes, 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 yes. And I think again, it's so critical. And we said this at the beginning, like the inclusion of our students in what we're doing, in the work that we're doing, in season selection, in talking to them, and the importance of having these conversations with them. And what you're saying leads to the next question that I sort of wanted to bring up, like, you know, what happens if you don't have enough BIPOC students, right? And I remember my undergraduate was Lehigh University, you know, middle of Pennsylvania. And, you know, there was about, between Latinx and Black, the percentage I think was like 3 to 5%. It would vary per year, right? But my department would produce a Black play every single year with a percentage of only 3 to 5% Latinx and Black students on campus. Yet every single year that I was there, and we're talking 20 years ago, and they've continued this. So how is a university in the middle of nowhere able, with such a small population of BIPOC students, able to do this, right? And so much of it goes with this notion of like, you've got to do the work. You've got to do the recruitment. I literally like find students, even if I don't teach them, I send them emails. I let them know who I am. I let them know I'm here. Gotten the students together, helping them create a club for students on my campus. And then we moved the club and gave the club a spot in our season this year. So again, this notion of like and a lot of you have mentioned this already, developing leadership skills, developing skills in the art form that go beyond acting, because theater arts isn't just acting. It is encompassing of dramaturgy and design and directing and acting and all these beautiful things that make the pieces of work that we have. So what are some of your ideas that you might have? And you've already touched upon these, like, you know, what to do when you don't have enough BIPOC students or you are in the middle of somewhere. So Jimmy just gave us a whole bunch of ideas to fit to this. Does anyone else have other ideas they would love to share in this regard?
I mean, I think Jimmy hit a lot of points there, and Dani also hit some in her last comment with regards to community outreach, right, and possibly connecting with other institutions, right? I mean, so I think about like Spelman College and Morehouse, right? For you know, you have Spelman, all male, you have Morehouse, all women, but they've been collaborating. Their dance and drama department, they've been collaborating for a very long time, right? And so it might just be simply about community outreach and how do we create partnership with other institutions or community organizations and so forth, and not necessarily colleges. And I also know that depends on where you are, right? Like I am in Chicago, I'm in a city. I sort of made it my life's mission to always stay in a big city, right? For the remainder of my life, wherever I live, wherever I go. For that very reason. I went to graduate school in Miami, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I did my master's thesis, I did a creative thesis, which was to write a full thesis while at the same time direct a production for the main stage, right? Season for the main stage production. And I was like, okay, well, you know, I'm someone who is getting a master's degree in theater studies with a focus in African-American theater and performance. And so I was like, I got to direct a Black play. Okay, cool. But A, we don't have the students. But B, this is sort of the note that I got from my mentor there. And this goes back to having, as Aviva said earlier, good mentors, right? My mentor, who was Paul Bryant Jackson, who we actually lost back in 2018, you know, his motto was, advertise and let the students know we are doing this, they will come, right? And that's if you have them there. But in the department, we didn't have a lot of Black students in the department. But I put it out there that we're going to do this work by Pearl Clegg, 5 Black women. We need y'all. And it took us 3 days to audition all the students, right? From all around. But imagine what happens when you open it up, not just your students, right, but the community at large. But I think this goes back to what everyone has sort of nodded to earlier, and in particular, Jimmy and Aviva. Start in the classrooms, right? Like, every time I teach a play in the class, I go, how would I feel if we did this, if we were to stage this next year, if this was on the season? It's really about getting the students excited about what the season could look like early on, so that next year and the year after and the following year, we can begin to sort of implement and put these works up because students are already excited, right? And so it takes a little time to do that. In other words, there are steps and stages to doing so. And then when you are out there and you are doing work around retention and recruitment and retention, future students begin to see, oh, they're doing that's the work they're doing. They're producing those types of plays. They're doing devised works and guest artists and, commissioning new art, new works. I want to go there, right? So really it's about a strategic plan to not only just simply worry about that semester. We don't have students to do the play this semester or next semester, but what are we going to do to get students here and enrolling in our program so that we don't have to worry about that, right? So I think it's really about the larger picture here.
Now, I want to throw a wrench in this because different programs have different needs. And so right now I'm on the faculty of a department that casts widely and is able to engage in these practices. But previously I was at Illinois Wesleyan University, which is more of a conservatory style program. And the entire acting pool comes from the majors. And the intensity of instruction is such that the couple of times that particularly Black students from outside the department were pulled in, it was often really challenging for them because they did not have the experience to be able to participate at the same level as the majors. And they were like, that was a harmful experience to say, okay, now you have to learn all your lines by the day after tomorrow, go. Right. And so to think about some of our practices and the ways in which we create our own barriers, yes, that being in rehearsal until 10 o'clock 25 hours a week of rehearsal is a real material barrier to a student who needs to work, Yes. And the expectation that students will do nothing else, right? The show must go on. Anything else that's happening in your life is not as important as rehearsal and performance. That value is not a value that is shared by everyone. Right. And so that there are exclusionary practices in our processes that are embedded, and that thinking about some ways that we might do things that are less centered in grind culture, right, and that actually do open up the opportunity so that we are able to value excellence in other forms, and so that we are able to make spaces that everybody can participate in.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing, right? Because everybody's program has different needs, different resources, different limitations. So ways to creatively talk about those openly as a faculty, bringing students on board to find creative solutions. I want to tell just two quick, a story and an example. I'll try to be quick here. So one of them was, I wanted to direct Water by the Spoonful. I really wanted to. It's a great play, right? And I had the ability, and I knew that I would be able to cast everybody except for the main character, Elliot, a Latinx man. And I thought about this a lot, and what we finally came to, the solution was, okay, we're going to open up a call. If no one comes, the department's gonna put the money behind hiring someone, and that experience of hiring and that actor will help. Okay, well, I had a young man come to the audition who had never acted before and who had only been kind of like a background character in Grease in high school and really didn't know what it meant, but said, yeah, I've always wanted to act. And I took the chance to cast him as the lead in the play. We took extra time. Yes, he kind of had a mini acting class alongside with me throughout the rehearsal process on his schedule. He was phenomenal and ended up playing the lead in the next play in our department. He just, really found a way to grow through the opportunity. It was a risk, and I never would have discovered him as a talent, and he never would have been able to fulfill his kind of dream of wanting to act had I not said it's okay, and had the department not agreed that it's okay, we'll put the money behind a guest artist if we're not able to find a student who plays this part. So I think that you'll be surprised who comes, but you do have to make that opportunity to teach them along the way, right? Like Dani says, you don't want them to feel like they're part of a different type of structure in the process because they might not have the experience. But the other example I want to give is something that we just worked on this summer. I have a lot of BIPOC students here at the College of Wooster who come and work with me and talk to me and, you know, complain to me about the challenges they face constantly. And so we've kind of always had a little mini group of just support system. And one of them asked me, why don't we make ourselves a formal group? And so over the summer, in response to what was happening, we decided that we were going to propose what we're calling the BIPOC Performing Arts Alliance. We expanded it to go outside of what we thought was initially the Latinx student population to include all BIPOC students, and outside of the theater department to include all performing arts students. We chartered this organization. It's official with the campus. It now has the ability to get money from student activities. It has the ability to fundraise. It has all the structures, right, that typically exclude our students. They're now built into this program, and they're going to use this BIPOC Performing Arts Alliance to bring guests, to bring workshops, to go travel, to be able to do more that helps them program, and it's their organization, right? I'm the faculty advisor, but they have the power now and the resources to do some of that work. My hope is, and we'll see how it develops over the next couple of years, is that it might be able to bring us more students, both through recruitment, but also the ones on campus who, you know, just never thought they could walk into the theater department and audition, right? This organization sponsored by the theater department is already opening itself up and empowering the students there. So I'd like to tell everyone listening, you need to provide the opportunities, because until you do, you're not going to see who comes to you, right? It's impossible to want people to come without opening up that inviting door that says you are welcome in this space, and more than that, you're empowered in this space.
Right. I'm going to jump in really quickly here on Jimmy's comment. And this really goes back to, I think, what everyone's been saying for a while. We got to really, and Dani just sort of hit it home, I think. We have to really sort of re-envision what our purposes are, I think, a little bit, right? So for me, and this goes back to something I said earlier, you know, of course I want the final product to be pretty and wonderful and entertaining, and do all the things that we want to do, but we really have to get away from modeling our theater programs at academic institutions as if this is regional and or community or commercial theater, right? That is not my goal in theater. I want to be very clear about that. You know, when I got the BA, I thought I was going to be on Broadway. I realized that's not what I wanted to do. Then I did the master's, and then I did the PhD, right? And so in other words, right, to Jimmy's point about this student who had this incredible opportunity, first and foremost, every rehearsal I enter into when I'm working with students, regardless if it's a reading or a workshop or a main stage production, right? It is a learning experience. And it is an acting class, it is a performance class, it is a design, it's all of the above, right? Mm-hmm. And so in those 5 to 6 hours of rehearsals, I'm always stopping and I'm like, all right, let's take a moment here, right? So let's talk about this for a second, right? It is a cultural studies class, right? And but I think part of that is we have to get away from, you know, modeling ourselves after community, regional, or commercial theater. You know, and I'll take away community theater, right? Because community theater, I think, is often, to me, produces the best theater, but often serves, you know, the community pedagogically, culturally, you know, politically. But in terms of commercial theater, right, we've got to get away from that, right? And this is, I think, what Dani was hinting at earlier, right? Sort of re-envisioning our purpose and getting back to some degree to the original intent of the programs in the first place.
One of the things my department has done is, we haven't done, we're doing it. We have created we're creating a season manifesto. And in it, we're looking at what should the 4-year experience be for our students? Like, what do we want our students to experience in these 4 years? Of course, it'll change. And so it's interesting to see some of the other documents that were produced pre certain faculty being hired, and to see, like, I remember it when they first showed it to me, I was like, oh my goodness, it's all white, European, white. And then everyone's like, yes. And, you know, that was an old document. And I was like, this is not what we want. Like, what is the experience we want them to have? Whether they come in thinking about recruitment, and thinking about retention, and thinking of like creating programs for them, and thinking about all the different aspects of theater, again. And you can still apply this as well to a BFA in acting and conservatory programs. And it's a remodeling and a rethinking of these practices. Aviva, as a graduate student, what are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was just actually typing in my answer because I wanted to make sure I got it in.
Yes,
I
yes.
think what I love, gosh, I wish I could come work with all of you. Hashtag hire me. But so I'll say that I was not a theater major in undergrad. I was actually a US history major, and I moved to the United Kingdom to get my master's degree in community engaged art. So as a PhD student, this is the first time I've ever been a theater major in my entire life. And I think what that speaks to is the fact that theater is the most interdisciplinary subject matter. So why are we not making it interdisciplinary? Why are we being so boring, right? I mean, first of all, I never believe it when someone says we don't have any BIPOC students to be in this show. I don't believe that. There's always someone on your campus. I understand conservatories are a little different, but speaking as someone at a large academic institution who has heard from their department, we don't have enough Black people to put on this show. I'm like, we don't have Black students at the second largest institution in America? That's not true, right? That's just simply not true. So I'm hesitant to even engage in that thinking in most instances within my own department because it's not true. Second, I think we need to reevaluate what we think experience means. And I think Jimmy really spoke to this, and I experienced this recently when I had a young man who really wanted to be in this production of As You Like It. And he nailed his audition. I happily cast him. And he said to me, Aviva, I have to be honest with you, I lied on my audition form. And I'm like, what do you mean? First of all, I didn't even look at it. He gave a great audition. I didn't need to see what High School Musical he was in, right? So I said, what do you mean? He goes, I've never done theater before. And I was like, but you're so good. How? And he said, well, I was in like church choir and this and that. I guess what I'm saying is so many students don't have access to after school theater program because like me, they're waitressing at a diner. They don't get to work in summer theater because they're at home working, right? They don't get to just be an unpaid intern. But we do have students who have been in choir their entire lives, their family's church. We have students who are praise dancers for their entire lives. We have students who have this performative experience. It just isn't, oh, they didn't produce, Romeo and Juliet when they were in high school. Who cares? I think the more rigid we are about what qualifications have to be, particularly in academic theater, the more we are gatekeeping arbitrarily, particularly when we are, again, in this interdisciplinary subject that is not supposed to have a gate. So why are we erecting one? Why are we building a wall right now when theater does not have walls? Theater doesn't have walls. So stop putting them up. Find your actors, find your talented performers in places that, you would not normally look, I guess.
Right.
And that goes to the audition especially even at conservatories, that goes to the type of auditions that you're holding at conservatories to the auditions for season selection. And I say this all the time. I discovered this year with my students when I was asked to direct in the Heights that I had to change the entire approach to auditioning. Most of my BIPOC students had never been trained in musical theater. So to ask them to bring X amount of bars in a classical music
change.
It's like, no. And so I had to talk to my musical director and really be like, okay, we're not going to require that. We need karaoke. My musical director was like, are you what? And I was like, and he's like, but I was like, no. I was like, you have to understand. I was like, we're trying to bring the students in for them to feel comfortable. I was like, I just need to know they can sing. I was like, I don't need to know if they have music, they have music. I need to know that they can sing. I was like, so that they can sing these roles, which are really hard. And my musical director's like, I'm going to trust you. And then in the auditions, she was like, oh my God, I've never seen so many students of color show up for an audition. And I'm like, when you change your audition practices, that's going to change also the opportunities. We have about a little bit less than 15 minutes, and I want to bring up our last question, who directs what, right? And should white directors keep directing BIPOC plays? What strategies do you have for working with BIPOC students in performances, especially if someone happens to be a white director and they are directing a BIPOC play, right? And what are you doing to give BIPOC students space? And what kind of advice could you give to white directors who are in these spaces and want to do this work? And how do you ensure that your BIPOC students are equally heard and respected? So I'm opening up the floor for like the last about 10 minutes before we close up.
So I'll jump in really quickly, and that is this. First and foremost, I think for me, the question, I understand the question, and I like that question, but I would also ask, not simply who it's directing, but why are you directing?
Yes.
There are some white directors out there who are just wonderful, and I will never dismiss or take away what they can offer to the world of theater, be it academic theater or commercial theater. I will never do that, right? But my question will always be, why are you directing this? And then when you're working with students in particular at a training institution, I would also ask, what is your approach, right? And so that is, are you one who believes that as a director, you are the interpreter, which is a very hierarchical approach? Are you the interpreter, right? Or are you someone who's just inquisitive, right? And you're going to enter this as sort of a journey to learn. So and this is my own experience. This goes back to my own experience when I was directing my master's thesis. This is back in 2010, so 10 years ago. There were two texts that I was introduced to at that time by my advisor, and that is Ellen Donkin's book, I forgot, with Susan Clement, Directing as If Race and Gender Matter, right? Sort of feminist approaches, and also Anne Elizabeth Armstrong and Kathleen Jewell's book, Radical Acts, right? Two books that for me are like, I keep them with me, and I refer to them all the time. But it really kind of gives you strategies and experience and exercises to decenter yourself, right? So for me, it was about decentering my maleness, right? And recognizing that I am there as a student, even though I'm the director, and to help frame, but I'm there as a student. I'm there to be inquisitive. I'm there to learn. And that's what I think I would just sort of throw that out there. Check your approach, right, of how you're entering into that process. Be it a white director, a male director, a privileged director in some form. Yeah.
So this was the question that I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning thinking about, because I am a white director. And I have been called upon to direct plays by BIPOC artists with some regularity through the last 20 years of my career. So I stopped and thought about that. And there are stories that I don't think I will do a service to that I then don't direct. And so I also think it's more idiosyncratic than like all BIPOC work, all BIPOC directors. When I am directing work by BIPOC artists, it's because there's some aspect of it that speaks to me. And my working style is influenced by critical pedagogy and Paulo Freire, and I decenter my authority and work from a place of vulnerability and of not knowing, as Khalid just said. And so I was thinking about how do I give BIPOC students space? And what do I do? And realize that I don't actually do anything different with BIPOC students than I do with white students, but I give a lot of space in my process for their interpretive processes, and that I'm the guide, but I'm not the sort of owner from on high. And that in particular, when I'm telling stories and I recognize the gap between my own lived experience and the experience of the story, and sometimes that's racial and ethnic, and sometimes that's about class, and sometimes that's about generation and age, right? I can't exclusively direct work about upper middle class white women from Connecticut, or I would do nothing but Wendy Wasserstein for the rest of my life. So, all right. So where are those gaps, and how can I interrogate them? How can I ask for help? How can we resource them dramaturgically? And I realized as I was thinking about my real process that I frequently am, from a just logistical standpoint, running multiple rehearsals at the same time. And so that I will give students agency and say okay, take this piece, go work on this piece, come back and show me a draft. And that's just a frequent way of working. And keep an open rehearsal room in which I want everybody's voice, and that anybody in the room who sees something and wants me to see it their way should pass me a note, and that's an open practice. And so that is a way of enlisting students as co-conspirators and as co-critical eyes, that I want them to make meaning of when they're not in a scene and they're watching a scene. I want them to make meaning, and that if they are making meaning that runs counter to what they think the show should be, or what they think I actually want to be doing, I want them to communicate with me. And I don't know if that's the right way to do it. And I hope some people have some good strategies, because I'm really excited to hear what the rest of you think, because I could use some new tools in my toolbox.
Yeah, Dani, I love hearing what you said about them being able to pass the note to you, because that's a wonderful idea. I also, one of the things that I always do in my rehearsals, and it's actually a production that Aviva was a part in with my theater company outside of the campus, but we were working with the femicides in Juarez, Mexico. Right, I'm a man. Right, I was directing a play about violence against women, and I was working with women in this production, and I knew that there were just some things that were going to be outside of my personal experience to be able to even understand or confront. And so one of the things that we had decided early on in the process was, if they ever needed to stop rehearsal, we stop, no questions asked, and they do their thing. And sometimes, even though, right, we tend to think that the director's supposed to be there at all times for something to happen. No, these individuals said they needed to stop for their reason. And the women in my rehearsal would go off, regroup, have their own talk, come up with whatever dialogue or moment they needed to have, as long as they wanted, and they came back. If they didn't come back, that was still a very useful rehearsal, because they were able to process those experiences and the way that the dialogue and the scenes and the research was affecting them. And I think that's sometimes a thing that I've seen, and right, it comes from my undergrad experiences as an acting student as well. Some directors just expect you to work when you're in the space, and they, as if you don't have feelings, as if you don't have your own reactions to what's happening, as if you somehow don't feel that it eats away at you, because some of the topics in these plays are so personal. And so I really believe in the ability for students to know from the beginning, if anything ever affects you or you need a moment to stop, just raise your hand and say, I need to stop. No questions asked. Second, just to go to the question that Daphne posed, which was, should white people or white directors be directing these plays? Yeah, I think people can do great plays, and I think people can do justice to these texts. My only hesitation would be, if you ever find yourself selecting a concept or wanting to do something because it's de moda, because it's of the moment, I guess, or the flavor of the day, or it's going to make you politically relevant. You're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I see so many people out there thinking, we're going to talk about race in this play because I want to make it a concept. No, don't do that. Find a better play that does it, where it's not just overlaid, because your students are going to know. Your students know how to analyze text. Your audiences know how to feel what's going on. So watch that. Reach out to your colleagues. Speak to your colleagues. I often feel that so many people in theater departments don't have conversations with their colleagues who might know things that maybe another person doesn't know, and that's okay. We're all learners in this process. Go to people for help. Ask, hey, I'm thinking about this and it's quite not working out, or do you see something wrong with this, or do you see this could be a problem? I mean, so much of what we encounter as departments in the US could probably be solved with larger dialogue, and that's what kind of shocks me in terms of this type of work. Theater is supposed to teach collaboration, yet we really don't trust each other to collaborate within our own departments. And then the last thing that I do want to say, because I almost forgot to make this point, which is we're creating all these spaces, and we're thinking of strategies to create spaces for our students that are safe. Your students are going to get pushback from their fellow students. That bias, that sometimes racism, that sometimes anger. We're doing a play for BIPOC students, so now I can't act because it's all about you, right? It's gonna be in there, and you need to anticipate that, because as much as we think our students are wonderful, they carry the same biases and the same histories that we do, that's based on institutionalized racism, white supremacy, all of these things that we're getting to finally discuss in our departments, and your students are gonna carry them, and you're not there to protect the students behind or outside of the rehearsal spaces. Prepare your BIPOC students for how to have those conversations, and start teaching in the classroom out loud, in an acting classroom, in a design classroom, in a directing classroom. When people tell you this is how you respond. I really think that that's a tool I wish I would have learned as an undergrad, how to respond to all my fellow theater majors who were always making it seem like somehow my race was giving me the upper hand. And I think we need to teach our students that.
Yeah,
No, I was just going to tag on. I'm sorry to interrupt you. As a white faculty member, like, that's something that white faculty members can do, to use our racialized specificity to help educate white students so that they don't do that to BIPOC students.
Yeah, if I can just share, as a BIPOC student, as a mixed Black woman, I did have that really painful experience where I got cast in a show in undergrad, and I felt that the concept was a Black version of a traditionally white performance, right? A family drama. The director had cast all mostly, I should say, Black or Black passing actors. And as soon as the cast list went up, white undergrads in the department, it started, oh, Aviva, this is your first show. I heard that you got cast because they're doing the Black version of this play. This is a thing that has chased me for years. It's a thing that's chased all people of color in these sort of scenarios. And when it happened to me when I was 18 years old, 10 years ago, I didn't know what to say. I remember it. I was at the beverage machine in our dining hall at the College of Wooster. And I didn't know what to say when it happened. But when that same thing was said to me as a graduate student, I sure as hell knew what to say to the person who did it to me then. So I guess, if I could go back in time and talk to little Aviva and say, okay, shut that person down right now, I would. But the reality is at that moment, I did not have a faculty mentor who I felt that I could go to and get protection and guidance and safety. So I do think, again, we need to think of ways that we can create these safe spaces for our BIPOC students, because it happens. It does. Even at the best, most loving institutions, it happens. So instead of pretending that it's not, think about how you can actively intervene and then eventually prevent.
Absolutely. And yes.
Last note is, I think also is that we have to look at the models that exist. And we don't have to, go into this as directors, right? As teachers, as educators, as directors, as if, things are new, right? Now, to me, none of this is new, right? We have models. For example, people I turn to often is like the work of like Rhodessa Jones and Glenda Dickerson, right? Or Barbara Ann Tier. And I look at them as models for how to do this, and to give us examples of how to, do collaborative work, theater making. B, how to, decenter our own identities, or decenter whiteness, or decenter maleness. And C, how to create works that serves a larger, that's sort of being produced for a larger purpose than simply to entertain, right? So I think about like works that are going into prisons, that are going into poor communities, that are going into organizations that are for women and children who experience abuse, right? Recognizing that theater is not simply about entertaining, right? It's not just simply about putting on a pretty musical, but looking at artists who are successful, right? Who have made careers out of using theater as a resource, as a tool, as a method to actively promote change. But again, they're directors as well, right? So what are some of the methods in which they're using? Yeah.
Thank you.
Two quick points real quickly, because
over time, but yes, Jim, yes.
Aviva demonstrated precisely what I think is most important and what we don't do, right? So Aviva's story was something that happened pre my arrival at Wooster, but that, like she mentions, and I'm not saying that as an excuse, I'm not saying that as an excuse, but what I'm saying is, she made that point later, years later, she made that point because, as she says, it haunted her, right? Our students carry these things with them. Yes. When I heard her say that story, it wasn't just one story. I automatically accepted that that's one story that represents dozens of stories, because by default, for every person that speaks out, there are people who do not speak out. So my job in hearing that from an alumni of the college, even though I was not involved, even though nothing had to do with me, I'm now implicated in that department's history, because we need to make a change. And I think that that's what, right? I'm only saying this because we're all part of departments where new people come in, people leave. There's constantly shifting moments. The student experience remains the same. If we are committed to open spaces, we have to take into account those moments from those students who have experienced them. We can't just, that wall Aviva says, it can't be a wall like that was the past, now we're in the future. No, we're grabbing those stories from the past, putting them in the present, and using them to envision a better future. The last thing that's just really important is, I love that these dialogues are happening. Have them before you start deciding your season selection, because then everyone gets busy and then everyone starts focusing on only the task at hand, and we know what happens when everybody's in a time crunch. Have them early on, have them before you even enter the season selection. And again, reach out to your students, ask them stories like Aviva told. What bad experiences have you had in the past? What things have been harmful? What things have hurt you? And then bring those to the discussions of your department. So it's not about a particular play. It's not about a particular director. It's a conversation being had based on the student experience that is really the evidence that we should be working off of in order to create a more inclusive season. And that's it.
you. And I think with that note, I'd love to give just a big applause to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and where you're coming from, what you're doing, and the changes. I hope for those of you who are here with us and listening to us, I hope this was helpful, and I hope that we were able to share some of the instruction that we're trying to do. And I know for some people, this might seem radical, and for some it might be, but for us, it's our lived experience. And so thank you so much again. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Thank you so much. And enjoy this wonderful Thursday and keep changing the field.